American audiences, I guess, best remember you for your Oscar-nominated role.
For Anne.
Yes, for Anne. And is that to you probably your most important role?
No, it was an important one, not just as a role, but as for me as a person, suddenly to find myself in that predicament of suddenly having made a Hollywood film and being sitting at Academy Awards night.
Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. This famous rhyme aptly sums up the 6, let's say, tumultuous marriages of King Henry VIII, whose 37 years reign is now remembered less for his political legacy and more for a revolving door of different queens. It's a story that has been told many times over the centuries, from various angles and in practically every format, with Henry always looming as the central force connecting 6 very different fates and 6 very different relationships. Yet one of those marriages undoubtedly left a far more long-lasting impression than the others, and only one of these wives remains a household name even to those with little interest in historical studies. I mean, I'm not sure how many Anna von Cleve stands are out there, make some noise in the comments if you are, and sorry, but when I hear Jane Seymour, I don't think of the Tudors, I think of her. But the name Anne Boleyn has certainly stood the test of time. Her story steeped in political and religious intrigue, her life marked by ambition and determination, her fate sealed by her failure to bear a male heir. It's a dramatic arc unmatched by any of Henry's other wives. And in a final twist of historical irony, she is of course also remembered nowadays as the mother of the most well-known monarch in English history. And so it is no surprise that her story continues to be told again and again to this day in books, plays and movies, including the 1969 epic Anne of the Thousand Days. For Canadian actress Geneviève Bujold, I apologize right away for my pronunciation of her name, her performance as Anne marked a big international breakthrough, the kind of star-making occasion many actresses can only dream of. An ambitious actress with clear ideas about what she wanted to achieve and how willing she was to get ahead, she always followed her own principles when it came to her career and her entire life. But while her work as a performer after the celebrated peak was in no way insignificant, it unfortunately also never again reached similar heights, and today, Anne of the Thousand Days remains the most prominent reference point for Geneviève Bujold's achievements on a big screen. So in this video, I want to explain the dynamics of Genevieve's intriguing career, its ups and downs, how she landed the coveted role of Anne Boleyn, and how she navigated the complexities of Hollywood without ever sacrificing her own artistic vision. And of course, how her big breakthrough garnered her a place among the year's 5 Best Actress contenders at the Academy Awards. And to begin with all of it, let's go back about 500 years. Texts and accounts about Anne Boleyn's life and character began to emerge pretty much right after her death in 1536, usually portraying her in 2 extremes. Either a cunning manipulator who more or less got what she deserved, or a powerless and innocent victim of her husband's cruelty. This ambiguity has inspired artists like William Shakespeare, John Banks and Jane Austen, and sparked a wave of creative interpretations across plays, novels, opera, television and movies. From the 1920 German silent film Anna Boleyn, to the private life of Henry VIII, or Young Bess with Gene Simmons as Queen Elizabeth I, right to the other Boleyn girl with Natalie Portman. The fascination with Anne's life and tragic fate has endured for generations, and so it's no surprise that her marriage to King Henry had also been realized on Broadway as well. Maxwell Anderson's play Anne of the Thousand Days premiered in New York in December 1948, starring Rex Harrison as King Henry and British stage actress Joyce Redman as Anne Boleyn. And in a season that saw celebrated productions like Kiss Me Kate and Death of a Salesman, Anne of the Thousand Days enjoyed a successful run of more than 280 performances before closing in October 1949. The play also received widespread critical acclaim, with reviewers praising Maxwell Anderson's blank verse and especially the 2 lead performances, describing Rex Harrison and Joyce Redman as a brilliant team. Harrison would also win the Tony Award for Best Leading Actor in a Play.
I thank you for your anger and for raising anger in me. There's no better way to make an end.
So given all this acclaim for Anne of the Thousand Days with its historical intrigue and two extremely showy leading roles, it's only natural to expect the play to make a swift transition to the big screen. After all, there was hardly a Broadway production at the time that was not turned into a motion picture. And Hollywood was even already familiar with the work by Maxwell Anderson. His play Elizabeth the Queen became the private lives of Elizabeth and Essex with Bette Davis, Mary of Scotland was adapted for the screen with Katharine Hepburn, and Joan of Lorraine became Joan of Arc with Ingrid Bergman. But the marriage of Henry and Anne proved to be too much to handle for Hollywood. Studios maybe constantly adapted controversial stage material, for example that by Tennessee Williams, by making some, in their eyes, minor adjustments like removing a gay lover or toning down some sexual innuendos, but Anne of the Thousand Days was based on history. Yes, you can tweak some dialogue and change some parts of the plot, but it was still impossible to tell the story of Henry and Anne without mentioning adultery, premarital sex, bastards or incest, meaning that this 500-year-old royal scandal stood no chance to make it past the constraints of the Hays Code. And so, a potential film adaptation of Anne of the Thousand Days had to bide its time and wait until circumstances would change in its favor. Hal Wallis ranks probably among the most renowned producers in Hollywood history. A two-time recipient of the Irving Thalberg Award, he produced classics like Casablanca, The Adventures of Robin Hood and Yankee Doodle Dandy, and is often credited for the discovery of acting legends such as Humphrey Bogart, Burt Lancaster and Errol Flynn. Many of Wallis's early movies belong to the gangster or action genres, but his personal interest focused on British culture and history, and he was always looking for opportunities to bring these topics to the big screen. And the arrival of the British invasion during the 1960s finally gave him the perfect opportunity. By the middle of the decade, American interest in music, movies, plays and performers from across the Atlantic reached an all-time high and paved the way for the stardom of actors like Julie Andrews, Peter Sellers, Michael Caine, Glenda Jackson or Julie Christie. Meanwhile, the huge expenses of Cleopatra discouraged Hollywood studios from continuing the Roman and biblical epics that had defined the previous decade. For Hal Wallis, it was therefore the ideal opportunity to introduce audiences to a new historical era, beginning with a movie version of the 1960 Broadway hit Becket, counting on the formula of combining history with exciting British newcomers. He therefore passed over Laurence Olivier and Anthony Quinn, who had originated Becket in New York, and instead cast Peter O'Toole, who had just gained international stardom with Lawrence of Arabia, and another British actor who was maybe not part of the new cultural wave, but still one of the biggest names in show business right now, due to his headline-making relationship and marriage to Hollywood star Elizabeth Taylor. And this combination of history and star power did indeed become a big financial and critical success, receiving 12 Oscar nominations the same year the other British-themed movies My Fair Lady and Mary Poppins dominated the awards.
Good evening and welcome to Santa Monica on the Thames.
For the following years, the increasing popularity of British history led to further acclaimed titles such as A Man for All Seasons and The Lion in Winter, but by the end of the decade, the momentum of the British invasion began to fade, and a new Hollywood movement launched a dramatic shift of styles and topics. Movies like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, and Midnight Cowboy challenged traditional filmmaking and introduced a new generation of stars, including Dustin Hoffman, Faye Dunaway, Jack Nicholson, Catherine Ross, Jane Fonda, and Jon Voight. And as controversial stories with a critical look at the status quo began to change the cinematic landscape, traditional historical dramas slowly lost their luster, even if Hollywood studios continued to see them as potential moneymakers. And in the eyes of Hal Wallis, the clash of societal changes and conventional storytelling was actually the perfect timing to revive a 20-year-old Broadway play about King Henry and Anne Boleyn. With the loosening grip of the Hays Code, the story's darker themes could finally be portrayed on the screen in full realism and result in a movie for both fans of classic Hollywood, but also a new generation of audiences with modern expectations. For Wallis, Anne of the Thousand Days was as contemporary in its messages as Easy Rider or In the Heat of the Night, a 500-year-old royal marriage that served as a psychological commentary on the evolving dynamics of modern relationships. And to emphasize this contemporary importance, casting was key for Wallis. For the part of King Henry, Richard Burton was apparently the only choice right from the start, even if, by this point, he was no longer the bright leading man he had been a couple of years earlier. By 1969, both Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor were considered relics of the past, symbols of a Hollywood that no longer existed and replaced by actors who stood for a different approach to stardom and performing. And they both were very much aware of that. Burton writing in his diaries at the time, "The world has changed. I mean our world. Nobody, but nobody, will pay us $1 million a picture again for a long time. I'm afraid we are temporarily out in the cold and fallen stars. What is remarkable is that we have stayed up there for so long." According to different sources, Burton had little interest in Anne of the Thousand Days, disliking his part, the script, the original play, and director Charles Jarrett, who so far had only worked on television. But he accepted the project for the generous paycheck and the hope that a prestigious historical drama might help revive his career after a string of critical and box office disappointments. It was a hope that Elizabeth Taylor shared. Following her second Best Actress Oscar for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, her career too took a sudden and dramatic downturn. For many years considered one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, as well as the most beautiful woman in the world, she now became heavily criticized for her looks, gossip columnists often insulting her as fat and sloppy, and she became typecast as loud, overbearing and aggressive shrews in movies torn apart by critics. The New York Times described Dr. Faustus as an awfulness that bends the mind, and following Secret Ceremony, Rex Reed wrote that the disintegration of Elizabeth Taylor has been a very sad thing to stand by helplessly and watch, but something ghastly has happened over the course of her last 4 or 5 films. She has become a hideous parody of herself. During these years, Elizabeth Taylor also dropped from the list of the 10 biggest box office stars, so it's understandable that she was highly interested in Anne of the Thousand Days. According to Hal Wallis's autobiography, she told him during a meeting, "Hal, I've been thinking about it for weeks. I have to play Anne Boleyn." Only a few years ago, the pairing of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor was basically a dream for any producer, but as just mentioned, by now times had changed, and Wallis remembered his personal reaction as, "Elizabeth was plump and middle-aged. Anne was a slip of a girl. The fate of the picture hung in the balance. I could scarcely bring myself to look at Richard, but he handled it beautifully. He put his hand on hers, looked her directly in the eye, and said, 'Sorry love, you're too long in the tooth.' Elizabeth took it like a trooper." But while the constant insults of Elizabeth Taylor's age and looks were of course outrageous, I mean, this is how she looked that year at the Oscars, and if this is supposed to be sloppy, I wonder what I am. It has to be said that Hal Wallis also had other reasons for believing that she was wrong for the role. He not only saw the marriage between Anne and Henry as relevant and timely, but even more importantly, considered Anne herself a character who fitted perfectly into the period of the emerging women's liberation movement. Maxwell Anderson's play had broken the long-standing portrayal of Anne Boleyn as either weak or overtly sexual and manipulative, humanizing her character by adding depth and complexity in a way few other pieces of art had done before. Anne of the Thousand Days captured not only the well-known beauty of Anne Boleyn that easily caught the king's attention, but also the reports about her intellect, wit and sophistication that were then able to hold it for the 7 years that passed between their first meeting and their eventual marriage. She was often described as stylish and graceful, with a noteworthy energy and vitality, quick to joke and engage in debates, a self-assured center of attention at a time when women usually presented themselves as submissive and humble, but also combined with an increasing arrogance and egoism that made her quite dangerous as well and left her finally completely alone when faced with her husband's accusations. The play captured all these aspects without asking for sympathy or pity, and also let Anne proudly decide her own fate by rejecting a historically inaccurate offer to save her life for the sake of her daughter, giving her ultimately the upper hand and the audience's understanding. And Hal Wallis wanted to increase this blend of charm, intellect, confidence, and overestimation further, shifting the focus of the story from King Henry in the play to Anne for the movie version, and portraying her as a sorely modern character. For Wallis, Anne was the heart of the film. While Richard Burton's established star power was necessary to secure funding, the right actress was needed to support the movie's message and turn the character into a powerful symbol of the current time. And in Wallis's eyes, Elizabeth Taylor was too strongly associated with a bygone era of Hollywood to give this contemporary relevance enough credibility. He therefore wanted someone who either reflected the new wave of Hollywood or a complete newcomer, unburdened by audiences' expectations or past screen personas. Among those considered were Julie Christie, Olivia Hussey, Faye Dunaway, Jane Fonda, Geraldine Chaplin, and pop singer Marianne Faithfull, but for months, Wallis remained unsatisfied. But he remembered that one day an agent called to tell me he had just the right girl for the part. I had heard that many times before, but at this point I was willing to believe anything, and wearily suggested he bring the footage to my screening room. It was 300 feet from a Canadian film called Isabelle. The minute she appeared on the screen, I was riveted. I saw a tiny, seemingly fragile woman made of steel, willful, passionate, intense. She was exactly the actress I wanted to play Anne Boleyn. Even her French accent was perfect. Anne had been educated in France. I hired the girl without meeting or testing her. Her name was Geneviève Bujold. Born in 1942 in Montreal to a devout Catholic working-class family, her father a bus driver, her mother a maid, Geneviève Bujold initially dreamed of becoming a nurse or a ballerina, but developed an interest in a different profession during her education at a strict convent school. I was not a good student and they didn't like me much, but they needed me to do my bit in a show or make a speech. I was good at it and liked it. Without realizing it, I knew this was my gift. It was my way of sharing and communicating. After Geneviève was expelled from the school at the age of 16 for reading the forbidden novel Fanny, she immediately began to pursue her passion for acting, selling her bike to pay for voice lessons and enrolling at Montreal's Conservatory of Dramatic Art. During this time, she also worked as an usherette in a movie theater where she spent time studying performers of classic Hollywood. Her independent spirit surfaced again when she left the conservatory at the age of 19, shortly before graduating, and joined a touring company as Rosine in The Barber of Seville, feeling that actual experience mattered more than a certificate. It was the first conscious decision in my life to say, forget the diploma. That didn't bother me one bit. I enjoyed my years at the conservatory, but I was happy to find myself on stage. And from there on, her career began to gain momentum. After The Barber of Seville, Geneviève quickly established herself as a highly versatile performer, appearing in different short movies, in TV productions like A Doll's House or Crime and Punishment, and on the stage with the Theatre du Rideau Vert Repertory Company, touring through Soviet Russia and France, in plays by Beaumarchais, Racine, Molière and Shakespeare. An appearance as Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream in Paris then caught the attention of Alain Resnais, already known for films like Last Year at Marienbad and Hiroshima Mon Amour. Completely captivated by Bujold's presence and personality, he cast her in The War Is Over opposite Yves Montand. Building on this breakthrough, she quickly established herself as an exciting new screen actress in France. She acted in King of Hearts with Alan Bates and The Thief of Paris with Jean-Paul Belmondo, and received the Prix Suzanne Blanchetti as the Discovery of the Year. Like her 1969 co-nominee Jane Fonda, she had found quick stardom in France, but also like Jane, Geneviève eventually began to feel bored with the kinds of coquettish and sexual roles she was being offered. She consequently returned to Canada, where she met her future husband Paul Almond, one of the country's leading television directors, with whom she would collaborate on various celebrated projects during the next few years. She then achieved first recognition in the US when she starred in a TV production of Saint Joan, which brought her critical acclaim and an Emmy nomination. Many Canadian newspapers already describing her career as meteoric. And it wasn't long before Hollywood took notice too. In 1967, Paul Almond wrote Isabelle, a rural drama about a woman who fears she might lose her mind, especially for his wife. The film was a significant success not only in Canada, but also in the United States, earning Almond a nomination from the Screen Directors Guild and bringing Bujold major recognition, as well as the aforementioned attention of Hal Wallis for his Anne Boleyn. As she put it, "If I had not played in Isabelle, this part would not have come my way." Geneviève admitted that she was surprised to be offered the role in Anne of the Thousand Days, given that she was virtually unknown in the US, but she also displayed a strikingly candid and grounded attitude toward the situation. Things unfolded naturally. Hollywood seemed so far away, but I worked a lot in Canada and I also toured in Europe. I always knew that I'd get away from my roots, at least for a while. I felt things would happen to me, that my life wasn't traced out to be like everyone else's. I see it as a logical step in my career. Geneviève also approached her famous co-star Richard Burton with this relaxed attitude when she met him for the first time in Paris on the set of his movie The Staircase, in which he and Rex Harrison, the original King Henry on Broadway, played an elderly gay couple.
It's been quite a year for movies. Did you ever think you'd see Richard Burton play both the king and the queen?
Geneviève later said about this meeting, "Of course I was tense and apprehensive when I first met Mr. Burton. But it was a positive feeling. I was not frightened. Mr. Burton was also tense. When you launch yourself on a major undertaking, there must be a certain amount of nerves about the place." The reaction of Richard Burton to his leading lady seems to be rather ambivalent. Official statements obviously had him praise her personality and describe her as a major future star, whom he compared to Vivien Leigh, but privately he was indifferent to her and her acting talents, writing in his diary, "She'll be alright I suppose, though she doesn't have enough dynamite and spit and venom and arrogance for the part. I think she firmly believes herself to be the legitimate heir to Rachel and Bernhard and Duse. She has all the power of a gnat, a dying one. I could whisper louder than her screams." Burton also always compared her negatively to Elizabeth Taylor, whom he obviously would have preferred to see in the role. And both Burton and Geneviève also had very different opinions about their parts and the movie itself. As mentioned before, it was mainly a paycheck for Burton, who had so little interest in the movie that Elizabeth Taylor had to force him to learn his lines. Geneviève, on the other hand, agreed with Hal Wallis about the contemporary relevance in the story and in her character, aiming to make Anne as modern and independent as the guidelines of the script would allow. Again, not a victim or a villain, but a woman with motives of her own, unwilling to settle for less than she asks for, her own person right until the end, strong, determined, equal. She read as many books about Anne as she could and saw many of the Queen's qualities, her independence and strong conviction of her own opinion, in herself, later saying, "If Anne Boleyn was living now, we'd be very good friends. And I don't like women particularly." But despite the different attitudes and Burton's overall resentment to her casting, both performers seem to have gotten along very well together during the 13-week shoot, which began in May 1969 and took place both on studio sets and relocations like the former Boleyn home Hever Castle. Richard Burton has been the kindest, most helpful man you could possibly meet. People sometimes say unpleasant things about him, but really he is so pleasant to work with and so considerate. It was like a chess game between us. We kept one another constantly on our toes. He could have destroyed me with one look, and he knew that I knew. Instead, he made me feel steadily more confident. Acting is an act of love. If you don't love the guy you're playing opposite, forget it. Acting is profound contact, deep mutual acceptance, tenderness, intimacy. Then taking off from that, you can even play hatred. Both actors would also eventually give nicknames to each other, Burton calling her Gin, she calling him Tonic. and it was this joke that caused the only real tension on the set. For Elizabeth Taylor, it was not easy to accept that she had outgrown certain parts, but even more painful were the relentless criticism and cruel remarks in the press about her appearance. So when an attractive newcomer was cast opposite her husband, she immediately began to worry about a potential affair, especially since she knew that Burton had a habit of giving nicknames to the actresses he became involved with. Wallis later remembered that she constantly called him on the set and occasionally dropped by personally, particularly when he shot his scenes opposite Geneviève Bujold. To be as close to her husband as possible, Elizabeth Taylor even appeared in an uncredited cameo, which caused a lot of criticism in the English press, since the extra who had been originally cast in the role was let go as a consequence. The most notorious incident about Elizabeth Taylor's involvement with the production was remembered by Wallis in his autobiography. The day we shot Anne's final scene, Elizabeth decided to pay us a visit. She swept onto the set with her entourage and settled down in her seat. Geneviève was mad. She turned to the director and me and said, "I'm going to give that bitch an acting lesson she'll never forget," and then took her position in front of the camera. Geneviève flung herself into the scene with a display of acting skills I have seldom seen equaled in my career. Then she stormed off the set. Geneviève herself never commented on this incident, but made some sarcastically subtle comments in interviews during the time, such as, "I have met Miss Elizabeth Taylor and she had been nice and discreet, and of course has never interfered with the filming, which I appreciated a lot, but I don't really know her." It's important to point out that neither Burton nor Geneviève Bujold, who was after all married herself, ever confirmed the suspicions of Elizabeth Taylor.
I adored and adore Elizabeth. We just find it impossible to live together because our temperaments are both very high and very explosive.
While Anne of the Thousand Days was originally scheduled for an early 1970 release, Wallis was obviously not new to the awards game and premiered it instead on a reserved seat basis at the end of 1969 to qualify for the Academy Awards. However, reviews of the movie were not as positive as he most likely had expected. Critics did not share Wallis's feeling that the movie had any contemporary relevance or anything important to say at all, seeing it mostly as a tired continuation of the historical epics that had come before, especially A Man for All Seasons, which shared many characters with Anne of the Thousand Days. Historical epics were clearly falling out of favor, and the picture was called intelligent but unexciting, something that felt like medicine, good for you but unremarkable, and 30 years out of date. The New York Times stated that Anne is one of those almost unbearably classy movies, like A Man for All Seasons and Beckett, that have a way of elevating the reputations of filmmakers without doing much for the art. Reviews for Richard Burton were equally split, some praising his work as a career highlight, others definitely noticing his own disinterest, calling him visibly bored, passionless and tired. In a way, the reviews for Burton were strongly connected to the reviews of Anne of the Thousand Days itself. If you like the movie, you probably also like Burton, but if you don't care for it, you probably don't care for him either. However, one aspect of Anne of the Thousand Days received critical acclaim from pretty much all critics, no matter what they thought about the movie: the performance by Geneviève Bujold. Her work was described as graceful, magnetic, forceful, exceptional, provocative and delightful, easily outshining Richard Burton and constantly overcoming the weaknesses of the script. One review stating that Geneviève rises above her lines and gives Anne a depth of feeling that combines royal arrogance with pure peasant warmth. Anne of the Thousand Days became an undeniable A Star is Born moment. Geneviève praised for her handling of the English language, which undoubtedly recommended her for further international productions, and she was consequently called the most startling newcomer since Julie Holliday, a young Katharine Hepburn, a Canadian Jean Moreau, a new Anouk Aimée, or ironically, the next Elizabeth Taylor. Her unconventional beauty was for many a throwback to classic Hollywood, but Genevieve's aforementioned indifference towards publicity and stardom made her a distinct part of a new generation of performers. She made it very clear in interviews at the time that acting was an honest and important passion for her, demanding but deeply fulfilling, something she approached with maturity and self-confidence. She always emphasized that she wasn't a starstruck ingenue overwhelmed by a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but had a very matter-of-fact opinion about her experience, saying about acting with Richard Burton, "I wasn't scared, if that's what you mean. It's a good thing to work with good actors, but that in itself doesn't make me nervous." Or about star culture, "If I become famous, then it is something I will face when the time comes. I am not ambitious for stardom. That's why I like living in Montreal. I can go out to the market here, looking like a bum, and nobody cares. Nobody looks at me twice. That's the way I want it." It was an attitude that created an intriguing contrast in Geneviève Bujold, the conventional nature of her movie and her role, clashing with a more modern perspective on acting that challenged conventional norms of fame and prominence. So even if the film's intended commentary on societal changes and the evolving role of women had not succeeded in the eyes of contemporary critics, Geneviève had undeniably succeeded in using her part to establish herself as an important member of Hollywood's new generation, and articles compared her to other newcomers like Liza Minnelli, Jane Fonda, Dustin Hoffman or Jon Voight, but without any controversy that many of these names proudly displayed during these times. Her only political opinion was her support for an independent Quebec, which American newspapers considered more cute than anything else, and she willingly played the publicity game for Anne of the Thousand Days, conducting countless interviews and attending premieres and galas on the movies and her own behalf. However, such marketing strategies were still not part of her personality, and she made it clear that she only did this because it brought her a chance to meet people she wouldn't be able to meet otherwise, such as Queen Elizabeth II or Tennessee Williams, overall preferring to keep her distance from the Hollywood machine as much as possible. "I don't know how to behave in a group. Even one-to-one, it takes a while before I'm comfortable. But when I get on a set or location, I feel it is my territory, and I feel good and confident. In other situations, I feel safer alone." Genevieve's aversion to traditional show business was also emphasized by her constant refusal to speculate about her future or capitalize on her new stardom. Instead, she immediately went back to Canada after completing Anne of the Thousand Days and did not work again for 8 months. When she returned in front of the camera, it was in another movie by her husband, emphasizing that she chose her projects based on the material, not potential fame or awards, and always open to any direction her life might take. "I like to be taken by surprise. I have no plans. I am like a woman who is always in labor. Every day I have a new contraction and my whole life changes. I believe in abandoning yourself to your destiny. I am in love with life, and I feel that life is in love with me." So Geneviève Bujold had made an undeniable impression with her first Hollywood appearance, giving a critically acclaimed performance that launched her into major motion picture stardom. Do I agree with all this praise? Well, I am happy to say, yes I do. Critics of 1969 and 1970 were entirely justified in singling out Geneviève Bujold as Anne of the Thousand Days' true spark and its only source of vitality and presence. Her portrayal of Anne Boleyn unfolds as a grand showcase of emotions that never goes too far, but always remains defined by subtle control and layered nuance.
If some young man wrote this song for you, Anne, what would you say of it?
I would ask him how his wife liked it, Your Grace.
In this Best Actress lineup, no other film so deliberately invites the audience to fall under the spell of its leading lady. From Anne Boleyn's very first appearance, it's clear that she's meant to captivate. Her wit, allure and intelligence command every gaze and shape every step and turn of the story that follows. Yet such an introduction can easily backfire, setting expectations impossibly high or tempting an actress toward overstatement. Geneviève Bujold, however, avoids every potential pitfall. She imbues Anne's early charm and mystery with effortless spontaneity and quiet confidence, never demanding attention, but allowing her presence to speak through poise and vitality, breathing authentic life into the movie's often stiff historical surroundings, elevating the material at every turn, but never feeling out of place or threatening to interrupt the flow of the story. Her performance sharpens the dialogue, deepens the scenes, and lends way to the plot, through choices that feel precise, lived in, and believably human.
How fortunate for His Majesty that the good cardinal is devoted only to the king and to England. Consider how dangerous it would be if so powerful a man had ambitions of his own.
In a cast filled with actors more experienced before the camera, Bujold may at first seem the least polished performer, her work less technically refined than that of her co-stars. Yet this never feels like a shortcoming. Instead, Geneviève overcomes her lack of background with a distinct vitality that gives Anne a domineering sense of individuality that separates her from the plot around her and makes her more tangible and emotionally immediate than anyone else on screen. Geneviève is the only actor in the cast who manages to feel wholly of the 16th century while still carrying a modern energy that gives the film its most intriguing and memorable dimension.
If we lose the king's favor, we lose everything.
Then say goodbye to it all, house, rank, and revenues, for I will not take the king to my bed.
Of course, the most compelling aspect of Bujold's performance is her work opposite Richard Burton, which defines most of her screen presence. And while Burton is indeed visibly disengaged in his part, substituting shouting and overacting for genuine character development, Anne instantly becomes the kind of object of desire she needs to be. Henry's obsession, his year-long determination, becomes easy to understand precisely because Geneviève refuses to play Anne with the expected manipulation or secrecy. Instead, she makes her open dislike of Henry straightforward and entirely believable. Because of this, both Bujold's performance and her chemistry with Burton are strongest when their characters are in conflict. I very much disagree with Burton's assumption that Geneviève lacked the needed venom for the part, because she can portray Anne's disdain, indifference and anger with the most delicious and damning spite, pushing each moment to its limit with visible delight but also earnest conviction. She's quick, unpredictable and lively, giving their scenes a tension that's impossible to look away from.
You're spoiled and vengeful and bloody. Your poetry is sour and your music is worse. You make love as you eat, with a good deal of noise and no subtlety.
However, because these moments of confrontation are so striking, I have to admit that the scenes in which Anne genuinely falls in love with Henry are perhaps the only weak points of Bujold's performance. The shift in emotion happens too abruptly to be entirely convincing, and there's something slightly theatrical in a way of pledging her love and devotion that feels less authentic than her scenes of anger and rage. But thankfully, these passages are brief, and soon the relationship returns to more compelling territory. Not hatred born of initial resistance, but one rooted in mistrust and disillusionment, as Anne comes to realize that she is no different to Henry than any other woman, unable to fulfill the expectations he had of their union.
We have a beautiful daughter. Next time, a son.
What makes Genevieve's work truly remarkable is the way she allows Anne to evolve throughout the story, beginning with a kind of youthful brightness, playful, defiant, even a touch of naive, but gradually growing into someone aware of her own strengths and intelligence. This development makes Anne's final scenes the highlight of Genevieve's performance, completing a subtle, almost unnoticed arc that catches the audience by surprise, revealing the human dimension of her character, the fear behind her composed facade, and the determined resolve as she faces Henry one last time.
Elizabeth shall be a greater queen than any king of yours. She shall rule a greater England than you could ever have built.
On paper, Anne Boleyn is not a particularly complex role in Anne of the Thousand Days. She often exists primarily to emphasize the film's central themes, with limited opportunities for deeper character exploration, but at the age of 27, and in her first major English-speaking role, Geneviève Bujold gloriously overcame all those limitations. She constantly goes beyond the written words, filling in the gaps of the script to imbue Anne with depth and complexity, with flashes of vulnerability beneath pride, and a fascinating balance of passion and calculation. Oh, and I must add that I have never heard anyone else use the word bastard so effectively. Seriously, I'm obsessed.
To marry Seymour and make our child a bastard is bastard by Bessie Blount. Once I told you any children we had would not be bastards. Bastards. They would be bastards.
So it's overall a performance that is delightful, memorable, complex and entertaining. A delicious portrayal of spite, love and regret. She is maybe not my favorite actress to ever play Anne Boleyn because
I don't know why you're in such a hurry to cut off my head. Why don't you wait a little while? Maybe it'll fall off by itself.
But Judy aside, Geneviève certainly delivered the definite portrayal of the character. One that stands out among all the spectacle around her and remains the most memorable and noteworthy aspect of Anne of the Thousand Days. Even if Geneviève Bujold maintained a generally indifferent attitude toward Hollywood and its star culture, the acclaim for her performance and the hype surrounding her as a rising talent quickly established her as a frontrunner for a Best Actress nomination. Many articles even considering her a frontrunner for the actual win. Richard Burton wrote in his diary, "It would be a good thing if Gen Bujold won an Oscar, which, since she's unknown, and if the film is as successful as Universal believes it's going to be, and if she keeps her trap shut about how horrible a place Hollywood is, she is quite likely to do." Well, Geneviève did mostly, to quote Burton, not keep her trap shut about her dislike for Hollywood, and while she maybe did not denounce the idea of an Oscar, as many other performers during these years used to do, she also kept her distance from the awards race, neither attending the Golden Globe ceremony, where she won Best Actress in a Drama, nor actively campaigning on her behalf. Again displaying her directness and confidence, she made it clear that she was pretty much expecting a nomination, saying, "If you're not a fool, and you're in a film produced by Wallis, and you're playing opposite Richard Burton, and if you're good, you know that you have a chance of getting a nomination," but also stated that she had no interest to actually win. "I'm not ready for an Oscar. It would be wrong of the Academy to award me one. I need to work harder, to get to the top gradually. It would be like sending the smartest boy in the 8th grade straight into college." When she was ultimately included among the 5 nominees, she commented, "I suppose there's a new respect from my neighbors. My dry cleaner is very proud of me. So is my milkman." I'm going into the details of the Best Actress race of 1969 in my Maggie Smith video, so let's fast forward a bit. Even without taking home the Oscar, there was widespread expectation that Genevieve's career was about to truly take off, leading to more high-profile and successful projects. But this rise never truly materialized, mainly because Geneviève had no interest to participate in projects that did not appeal to her personally. Following Anne of the Thousand Days, she had signed a 3-picture deal with Universal, but then rejected Hal Wallis's idea to cast her as the title character in Mary, Queen of Scots, again directed by Charles Jarrett. "I don't want to play any more queens. Give the part to some other actress who wants the job and would be very good in the part. With me, it would be the same producer, the same director, the same costumes, the same me." Wallis warned Geneviève that Universal might sue her if she refused the role, but she did not believe him and turned the project down. And Universal sued. Working in Hollywood was now pretty much impossible for her. She therefore went to Europe to film The Trojan Women with Katharine Hepburn and did some work in Canada, but her post-Oscar career very quickly turned into a big disappointment in the eyes of American columnists, with no follow-up project that lived up to the expectations that had been created after Anne of the Thousand Days, some newspapers already calling her a victim of the Oscar jinx. Geneviève herself, however, never regretted her decision to turn down Mary, Queen of Scots. "I didn't think in terms of career. I was just going with what was happening. It was the decision at the time. Good or bad, that was it. I can't explain it. It's just the way I was, and still am. I say yes, and I also say no. There's 2 words. They exist. And I don't look back. I really make an effort at cultivating being in the moment." When she finally came to an agreement with Universal and starred in 1974's Earthquake as part of her contractual obligation, newspapers already referred to the appearance of the 32-year-old actress as a comeback. Another picture she did for Universal was Swashbuckler, which she personally enjoyed making, but she had no interest in conducting any publicity on these movies' behalf, considering neither of them worth all this time and effort. I take no responsibility for those films. I just do the best work I can, and then it's somebody else's responsibility. My work is finished. I don't see why I should give out interviews to promote it. I have nothing to say. If it's a flop, it's because the public doesn't want to see it. I can't do anything about that. If you try to talk people into seeing something they don't want to see by peddling yourself, then you become a saleswoman and a prostitute, and I am neither. Unsurprisingly, it was not an attitude that garnered her a lot of support from Hollywood studios. In 1973, Geneviève divorced her husband, stating with her usual frank openness that she fell in love with another man and settled down in Malibu, where she would focus on raising her children and aiming to establish a balance between her private and professional life. She only wanted to appear in movies that were shot in California and didn't take a long commitment, so she would not be far away from her home for too long and could maintain her spontaneous personality, saying, "What will happen to me in 6 months' time? I'm just not interested. There's so much happening today. Whatever I tell you now will be obsolete by next week. I don't know where life will take us tomorrow. I live each day at a time and make each minute work for me until the minute is over. Then I go on to something else. Although it's fascinating and inviting, I'm very reluctant to go into a film. It involves 3 or 4 months of my life. It's frightening." This attitude was especially visible in 1994 when she was cast in Star Trek Voyager and left the project again after 2 days of shooting, finding the rigorous demands of such a series incompatible with her way of life. "I used to feel, and still do, that my work is almost religious, something sacred. I want to keep it that way, not let it get polluted, not get sucked into something that's not me. I want to stay true to art and to life. When I go out, it's because I really want to. I know I can share some truths. My truths." Some of Geneviève's major movies in the decades after Anne of the Thousand Days included Coma with Michael Douglas, Obsession by Brian De Palma, Tightrope with Clint Eastwood, and Dead Ringers with Jeremy Irons, but by the late 1980s, she turned her attention again on her home country and began to appear more regularly in Canadian productions, confirming her reputation as one of the country's finest actresses. During her career, she received multiple Canadian Film Awards as well as the Governor General's Performing Arts Award, the highest honor for a Canadian artist. Of her Oscar nomination, she said many years later, "Oh, that was very nice. As always, you wish you could have gotten it for something else, for a part you thought you did better. But it was a lot of fun, quite glamorous." So while she maybe never again reached the level of international attention she experienced in 1969, Geneviève never looked back with regret or confusion, instead leading a deeply fulfilling life and career that remained firmly rooted in her personal values, consistently prioritizing meaningful work over fame, balancing her profession with family, and only accepting roles that met her high standards. As she later summed it all up, "I think I've earned the right to be whatever I want to be."